Hello. Today I'm going to have a bit of a look at reseeding, or as we call it in New Zealand, regrassing, and a bit of a look at clover. And this is going to be quite different than some of the Irish mainstream advice, because it's something that quite frustrates me at times, actually, some of the mainstream advice around reseeding and around clover. So I'll probably be looking into clover a lot more with visits to some farms, but today I'm just going to have a look at the establishment of the clover and reseeding. So I'm actually in a paddock here of a client who's just taken on this block. So it's going to be support for replacements and silage and some zero grazing. After this, I'm just going to have a look at some stuff that has been reseeded already, which is right up against the milking platform, and we're going to be milking off. So we'll have a look at that after here. But this stuff here, it's really poor pasture. When you look at it, there's so much weed grass in here, and it's fairly clean as far as there's not a lot of docks or ragwort or perennial weeds in here. And that's a real biggie when you're looking at reseeding, is are there just annuals in here that are a problem, or are we dealing with a lot of perennial weeds? So this sward here has been here as long as what most people can remember around here. It was probably last reseeded somewhere around 25-30 years ago, and so it's in desperate need of some new grass and get it performing. There's no point paying a massive price for the lease and not getting high performing, good quality pasture out of it. And we want to front load that cost so that we get the value of that increase in quality and growth through the term of the lease. So over here, soil tests have come back. pH is actually sitting at a really good level at 6.5, 6.6. P and K are actually very good, sitting at index 3, and the organic matter actually is sitting 19 to 22%. Now, this is a huge thing. People think the more the better when it comes to organic matter, but when you've got that higher organic matter levels, basically what you have is a whole lot of dead stuff in the soil, which there's a difference between just having dead stuff and having live bioactive soil. And so these days ploughing is really frowned on, that we were releasing carbon and it's supposed to be detrimental to everything we do. Look, this is really important here when you've got organic matter levels so high, and we've got a thatch that's built up in the base of the plant, that ploughing will actually just reset this and activate some of that bioactivity in the soil to just get that high organic matter level breaking down a bit and becoming bioactive. And that's really, really important. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix some fulvic acid with our glyphosate at a rate of about 1 litre of fulvic acid to 5 litres of glyphosate. And that's just going to help stabilize that glyphosate in the soil to make sure that we minimize the damage that we do on the bioactivity in the soil. We're going to add half a tonne of lime per acre. So it's quite a light rate, but around that sort of 1.2 tonne per hectare of lime. But we just do want to counteract some of the decaying trash that's going to be acidifying there. So even though the pH is at our target level, we're just going to add a little bit of lime to just counteract that acidifying trash that we're going to be burying, because we're just going to give it a light grazing. We're going to spray it off. We're not going to graze it after spraying with anything. We're just going to plough that remaining thatch into the ground as much as we can, but we're going to have to give it a little bit of time to be able to plough it. So the big thing here, and the big thing that frustrates me, is that the mainstream advice is always like, at sowing, 2 bags or 3 bags or 10, 10, 20. But there's so much organic nitrogen already in the soil, when you're going grass to grass and it's been in grass for a long time, or 5-10 years, you have organic nitrogen in the soil. And so adding more nitrogen at a time of sowing, for me, is a big no-no. Yes, it'll establish quicker, it'll look green quicker, it'll throw a leaf up quicker, but that's not what we're ultimately really trying to do. We're trying to make that plant establish at a natural rate to make sure that we optimize the root development on that plant, not just throw a plant up and we're happy days because we're grazing it in 40 days. You're better off to delay grazing by 5 days in establishment, but making sure that you have the right balance of root development and then leaf development. So nitrogen is mobilized through solar activity and your photosynthesis process, and of course a plant can't do that if it hasn't got leaf. And so if you're throwing on more and more nitrogen at the time of sowing, the plant's going to go, man, I want to throw that leaf up because I want to be able to mobilize that excessive end that I have, and it's going to do that at the expense of root development, and that's not what I want to do. Now the other paddock that we're going to go to, that's going from tillage. It's been cropped now for probably 70 years, and that'll have depleted organic nitrogen reserves, and so there's a little bit of a different strategy there. The other thing is we're going to go with quite low N use. You know, we're all about optimizing nitrogen use on this farm and making sure that we're trying to grow as much grass as we can, or as much pasture as we can at times where we're in deficit, but we don't want to go mad and grow 120, 140 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day when our demand is sitting at 60 and 70. Like, we don't need those excessive growth rates. So we're not necessarily picking our grasses off the very top of the PPI list, because a lot of those grass varieties have been grown under very high N conditions, and I find that the likes of Abergain is a phenomenal plant in ideal conditions with lots of nitrogen thrown on, but as soon as you put it under a bit of pressure, it can get into a stress situation very easily. And especially when you're trying to rely on the clover to provide some of your nitrogen, and you're reducing your nitrogen application levels, some of those varieties don't last so well. So we're going with a few Aston varieties, Aston Energy, Aston Conqueror, and our clovers, sort of a medium leaf Crusader buddy type clover over here. Now with clover, that's the big thing, you know, like we're being hammered with this message of clover, and it's all about immobilizing atmospheric nitrogen. But the thing is, if you really want to rely on clover mobilizing some of the atmospheric nitrogen later on, throwing a whole heap of nitrogen on at the time of sowing already puts you behind in that respect. Like, you're developing a clover plant that's going to be lazy. So making sure that if you wanted to go down that track of relying on clover to mobilize atmospheric nitrogen for the surrounding plant, surrounding ryegrass plants, then don't put nitrogen on at the time of sowing. That's a big no-no. So we are going to go with nitrogen, but we're going to go probably with about 10 kilos of nitrogen once the sward is up and it's green, and it's at least at a 2-leaf stage. That the ryegrass plant is at least at a 2-leaf stage. That's when I'm going to go with nitrogen over here, and at a rate of about 10 kilos of nitrogen. So probably half a bag of 18612 in the old terms. So somewhere around there, we're going to get some P and K on, and we're going to get some nitrogen on, but at very low rates. So we're trying to establish a sward that we are going to be able to rely on the clover to mobilize atmospheric nitrogen. You know, I've seen so many places where people have done recent reseeds and they put clover in, and then they cut the nitrogen back, and these really fancy swords are performing at 1 to 2 ton of dry matter less than what some of the older swords are doing on the platform that have no clover. So, you know, you have to be really careful about cutting back your N when you've got clover. It needs to be at a really good percentage, and like I said, if you create a bit of a drug addict at the start of it, that clover is never going to be highly active at mobilizing atmospheric nitrogen. It's not going to be efficient at doing so. So, you know, you have to think about what you're trying to do. Like, I've always been reluctant to push clover too hard, because when I was share milking back in the 1990s and had 300 cows, one morning I lost 15 with bloat, and you know, economically that was really tough. I was borrowing a lot of money at that time. I was under a lot of pressure, and they're never your bad cows, you know, like they're usually the cows out of the first couple of rows, some of those really good high performing cows. And to arrive in the paddock after milking, you know, back then we were drenching the cows every morning with bloat oil, and I drenched them for bloat, and gone out after milking, and 15 cows blown up dead. You know, of course I rounded up the rest of the cows and got them moving, and you know, once you get cows moving, they start moving a bit of that wind out of them, and I didn't lose any more than what was dead in the paddock. But for me, economically, it was a massive hit. I lost the production for the year, lost 15 cows, but emotionally, you know, like already I was under pressure, and you know, my mental health suffered pretty hard. Yeah, I went through a very tough patch there because of it, and as such I've always been reluctant to push clover too hard, because it does come with some challenges in that respect. Look, clover can be managed, bloat can be managed, but it's just something to be aware of, that it's not the be all and end all. The huge thing with clover is that it comes with way more benefits than just the atmospheric nitrogen. So clover root systems sort of gather the soil into more ball-like structures, which means that that soil is more efficient at retaining moisture for dry weather deficits, but also it allows for better water infiltration. In July, August in the northern hemisphere, and that's sort of a late summer to autumn, when your ryegrass plant's gone through the reproductive phase and drops down in energy levels, your clover will maintain energy levels and digestibility. And so, you know, if you want to do high production with minimal meal inputs, you know, clover is actually a really big part of doing that. You know, so there's a lot of benefits to clover, but doing it for nitrogen alone, I think it's a really tough ask. Like I said, people tend to cut back nitrogen when they don't actually have anywhere near enough clover to be able to do so. And what I've seen quite a bit is that they tend to do that sort of mid-May to mid-June. They start cutting out the nitrogen. Now, a farm I was on a couple of days ago, you know, like that multi-species, a lot of legume, a lot of clover in the swords, and 2 rounds of slurry plus 40 kilos of nitrogen applied already to date. So over 80 kilos of nitrogen per hectare applied to date, and the plan was to cut nitrogen out in May. This is one of the greatest mistakes I see. You've created a drug addict, you've made that clover lazy. Now your ryegrass plant is about to go into the reproductive phase, and you cut your nitrogen out. So if there's anything that makes a ryegrass plant want to go to head more and quicker, it's stress. And if you've created that drug addict on cheap, easy nitrogen, and then you pull it out, you're going to have a plant that's going to want to go to head at a much earlier stage. And so, you know, like, just be very careful that, you know, maybe if you're going through that time, you reduce your rates. You know, like, instead of going with 20 kilos of nitrogen, you might go with 10 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. You need to have at least 25% clover in the sward. It needs to be highly active. We never really saw that last year in 2024. Clover just never became active enough to mobilize enough nitrogen for the surrounding grass plants. This year is shaping up for it to be the other way around. I think, you know, like, we've been able to get good grazing conditions through March, so the sward is open, which the clover loves. The soil is coming from a much drier base, so we're dealing with much more aerobic soils, and the clover plant loves that. So, you know, I expect to see more active clover this year. You should be able to rely more on it supplying some nitrogen. And yeah, we'll go and have a look at the block that's already been reseeded and see if that's actually emerging, because it should be. So yeah, this is the block that's going to be attached to the milking platform. Cows just have to cross the road. So this farm used to milk 200 cows. It's cut back to milking 130 last year because we lost a piece of ground. This bit was always in between the piece that they were leasing and the home block, and so there's already a roadway in here for the cows, because he was leasing a strip through here to get to the other block in the past. So luckily it's still here, and now instead of that block on the other side, he's managed to secure the block in between, so that's worked out really well. Now the plan was to milk 130 cows, carried 160 through the winter, and the plan was to sell a whole bunch of cows, and then all of a sudden, kind of, you know, you'd hope for years to get a hold of this block to lease, and all of a sudden this came available. So instead of selling the surplus cows, we've kept, there's 155 cows milking on the milking platform of 31 hectares. So yes, about 5 cows per hectare, so the demand has been through the roof, but luckily there's been a lot of silage on hand, and you know, the conditions have been just absolutely super through March. So got away with milking a high stocking rate. We're going to have to do so for just a little bit longer, because yeah, this isn't going to be in. I see it's just starting to emerge now. So when you have a look at this little wee plants through here, yeah, there's lots of ryegrass started to come through, lots of weeds started to come through as well. So this, as I said earlier on, was in tillage and cropping for 70 odd years. We thought it would look worse once it was worked up, but luckily over here this client in Wexford has a massive strawberry business, so he has a lot of cocoa peat. So what we did is we put cocoa peat and worked it into the ploughed ground just to give us some organic matter and some aeration as such, so try and get some form of aerobic soil going with the cocoa peat, and I think it's worked really well. It's just given us a bit more drainage, and the soil looks really good. And yeah, look, it's established. So it was sown 14 days ago today, and it's just starting to peep its head up. So hopefully we'll be grazing it in about 40 days. We went with a little bit of a different mix over here, but yeah, pretty much the same as on the other block. And the other block, the other variety is a bit more suited to being mown than the one over here, which is all grazing. Every farm is so different. The same message doesn't work on every farm, but the same principles do. And so, you know, make sure you think about what you're trying to do. We're trying to get efficient, high-performing pastures that grow well in the shoulders of the year and have resilience through dry spells. Having resilience through dry spells revolves around a little bit of diversity. Having that clover in there is going to help that diversity through dry spells and retaining moisture into those dry spells, but also root structures. If your roots are just living in the top 1.5 inches, then you've got no resilience in your plant. You can go from growth rates of 150 a day down to 20 a day in a week because you've got absolutely no resilience. You know, you need root structures. So yeah, consider that when you do your reseeding, consider that with your nutrient management. And hopefully you've found this interesting, and thanks for watching.
Bye.